Hello, and welcome to the Educators and Immigration Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerardo Mancilla. I immigrated to the United States at a young age and am currently working as an assistant professor of education. In this podcast, we will explore the intersection between various immigration statuses and how that relates to our K-12 educational system. We will explore how educators can support immigrant families, undocumented youth, and students with DACA. Join us to learn more about these topics, listen to our guest stories, and explore resources to support students. This is the Educators and Immigration Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of Educators and Immigration. Thank you for all the positive feedback that we've been receiving about this podcast, about the stories, and about the resources that are being shared. Today, I'm very excited to be talking to attorney Aissa Olivarez. Aissa is the managing attorney at the Community Immigration Law Center, or CILC. She joined CILC in August of 2017 and as part of the organization provides deportation defense. Aissa has represented many clients in removal and bond proceedings and appeals. Prior to joining CILC, Aissa was a staff attorney at the Pro Bono Asylum Representation Children's Program, where she represented unaccompanied minors who were placed in removal proceedings by the Department of Homeland Security in Harlingen, Texas. In 2018, Aissa was awarded the Belle Cass La Follette Award by the Wisconsin Law Foundation for her work with underserving communities. Aissa was also a first-grade teacher for 4 years in the Austin Independent School District before deciding to pursue her law degree. Aissa, it is a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So can we just begin by kind of hearing a little bit about your story, who you are, and what kind of work you do?
Sure. So I'm originally from the Rio Grande Valley, which is a region along the U.S.-Mexico border on the most southern tip of Texas. I was raised in the city of McAllen, and I'm a third-generation Chicana, Mexicana on my dad's side, and maybe as far as fourth or fifth generation on my mom's side. We don't know. They grew up in Encino, which is near Falfurrias, and is a lot of ranch land. And so the family, came there and lived there for many generations. Our family from Mexico hails from Tamaulipas, and my great-grandfather would cross the Rio Grande to work and finally decided to stay in Rio Grande City and ended up deciding to raise a family there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's interesting to kind of think about people going across the border and what it used to be like to be able to live in the border town and be able to go back and forth. And now thinking about going to the U.S. border and thinking about what it's now and how even the people who are commuters between the U.S. and Mexico, what the policies and practices are for them.
Yeah, exactly.
So can you share a little bit about what you do professionally? I kind of read a little bit about it in your bio, but can you share from your perspective, like what do you do professionally?
Sure. So professionally, I'm an attorney and I practice immigration law. And as you mentioned, I specifically focus on deportation defense, which is a pretty niche practice within the realm of immigration. There's lots of different things that immigration law controls, the types of visas, but specifically I practice deportation defense. And I also recently started working with Step Up Equity Matters as a facilitator and consultant for equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this work is also very important to me because as a former teacher and now attorney, I have seen the real life impact that inequity and injustice in systems has on our communities. And I feel really strongly that bringing change through policy is important, but I also feel that effective change comes through educating individuals around EDI work. So the work that I do now is focused on bringing change through education around bias and microaggressions.
That's very important work. And you also kind of mentioned about both the professionally as well as the work that you're doing with equity and diversity and inclusion right now. Mm-hmm. As you think about what is all the work that you've been doing from the time you were a teacher to now professionally in law and now doing the equity and justice work, what kind of drives you or what motivates you to work with different communities and to support various communities?
Sure. So when I started as a teacher in Austin, I would meet with families about their students and their children, and I slowly, they started to trust me, and they started bringing me letters from USCIS or EOIR, and they would ask me to translate them. And, I grew up on the border where 98% of people are Latinos, so I grew up in a real bubble. So when I moved to Austin and I worked with these families, I saw that there was a fear in their eyes. There was a vulnerability, and I stood out to them as somebody that they could trust. And so when they were going through these legal processes, USCIS, right, immigration court, EOIR, I wanted to be able to take my advocacy to another level because, yes, I could have continued to write letters of support, translate things, but I wanted to take my advocacy into the courtroom. I felt like that's where I could start to actually make a change. And I wanted to understand the law and be in a position to push the law forward for these families. And so that's how I started doing this work.
So the students that you had in class, they were asking for petition or support letters as they were doing their own immigration processes. And it's really powerful to hear about how to go from that experience of doing it in the classroom to then taking it to how then we continue to make systematic change or be able to affect policy at another level. And so you mentioned that that's kind of where you started, and you continue to do this work many, many years later. Has there been something that has been encouraging you or motivating you to kind of continue this passion and keeping this passion going?
Yeah. So I was born 10 minutes north of the U.S.-Mexico border, right in the 80s. I won't tell you what year. But I visited Mexico often with my family, and I saw the stark difference just 10 minutes south of my home in McAllen. And I recognized my privilege at a very young age. I contemplated then at a young age how it was possible that a line on a map would create two very different worlds. And I became passionate about social justice issues in school. And honestly, I believe that immigration issues, immigration law and policy is a civil rights issue of our time, one of the more important civil rights issues of our time. So as I became engaged in the education system and different levels of the government, right, I used to work in the Texas legislature. I was in the nonprofit world. I've been exposed to the legal system. I've seen major flaws that have made these systems work for only some people. And I want to do the work that disrupts these systems and makes them work not just for some, but for all, regardless of immigration status.
That is amazing. And also to hear about the multiple hats and the multiple places where you were doing this work. And it's similar work, but it looks different based on the non-for-profit. It looks different if you're in the classroom as an educator. And it looks different if you're an attorney also representing people. And so it's interesting to think about it's the same work, but it looks different depending on which hat you're wearing.
Right.
And so currently you're working for the Community Immigration Law Clinic. What are some of the services that CILC provides?
Sure. So we have two major programs that we run right now. The first one and the most popular is our Friday consultations on the second and fourth Friday of each month from 2 to 5. We are housed within Christ Presbyterian Church, and Christ Presbyterian Church on the Near East Side also used to host these clinics in person, but then the pandemic hit and everything changed. And so we've been actually holding them virtually, and our attorneys will call individuals that we have signed up on a list for these consultations. And we've found that this has really opened access to individuals not only in our local community but across Wisconsin. And it also makes for an easier way for people to be able to call from their homes if they don't have childcare or if they can't get off of work in time to get in line. So I think we're going to continue to do the virtual piece so people can call in to our office 608-640-4444 and ask to be put on this Friday list. And our attorneys will give them a call on the second and fourth Friday. Our other major program is that we have a universal representation program here at CILC, which provides deportation defense to individuals who are at risk of deportation from Madison and Dane County. And so when I talk about universal representation, what that means is that we offer representation to anyone from Madison and Dane County that is at risk of deportation, and they're detained and they cannot afford or hire a private attorney. This pilot program started in New York City, and they saw that people who were unrepresented had a 3% chance of success without a lawyer, right? Representing themselves in a courtroom in adversarial process, and they had a 30% chance with a lawyer. So we brought that program here to Madison for Dane County residents and have seen really similar outcomes. Universal representation is a way to disrupt this deportation pipeline that has been working efficiently since the Obama administration, and putting lawyers in immigration courtrooms helps to reunite families, keep our communities intact, and builds trust in our local systems.
And the statistics that you shared about 3% if you don't have a representation versus 30% if you have a representation, that's a huge increase in terms of just thinking about being able to represent somebody and be able to be there with them through this hard process of going through the deportation process. The first service that you mentioned the CILC does is the clinic. Are there any what kind of questions do people bring with them to think about for the clinic? Are there specific topics that they focus on? Or at what point are there maybe referrals made to other institutions?
Sure. So our CILC walk-in clinic, or now virtual clinic, on the second and fourth Friday, we have wonderful volunteer attorneys whose expertise varies between family-based immigration. So if you get married, or if you have a family member who you want to petition for, we have attorneys who can answer those questions. If you've been the victim of a crime, we have attorneys who specialize in making sure that people see the process for applying for a U visa. We also have attorneys who specialize in student visas and getting a student visa and being what can you do and what can't you do when you have a student visa and maybe you're studying at UW or MATC. And we also have people who specialize in employment. We have a lot of different attorneys that have different expertise. I myself do the removal question, so people at risk of deportation have information and want information about, what could happen to them. I will usually speak with them, but we have a lot of other really great resources in our community. Centro Hispano works a lot around naturalization cases and DACA cases. We also have the Immigrant Justice Clinic at the law school that works with special immigrant juveniles and the SIJS visa. And we also have the Immigrant Affairs Office of Dane County, which I'm going to call out and say that this is a very unique office. Not everybody in every county or every state has something like this. And so the Immigrant Affairs Office of Dane County also has really great case managers who have access to great resources for the immigrants in our community who have questions about, where do I go? Is CILC the right fit for me right now? Can they answer my question? Maybe should I go to Centro Hispano, or do I go to the law clinic at MATC? So definitely the Immigrant Affairs Office of Dane County has their, finger on the pulse of what's going on in the community. And their number is 608-242-6260.
Thank you for sharing all those great resources. You mentioned that CILC now becomes a little bit more virtual. With the fact that it's virtual, it becomes accessible to more places than just the surrounding Madison area. Have you seen an increase in the amount of people who are taking advantage of being able to do a virtual visit and the reach that CILC now has had as well?
Yes. There was days when we had our clinic in person when we would see 1 or 2 people, or weeks when we would see 15, 20 people. With this virtual, we're seeing a very steady, influx of calls. We get 4 to 5 calls a day being asked to put on the list. And we only have 2 attorneys that volunteer, between 2 and 5. And so we also want to honor their time. So, but we do make sure to get to everybody. We want to make sure that we are accessible, that people get their question answered, and that they get it answered by somebody who's reputable, who knows what they're talking about, and can send them off to somewhere that they're going to be taken care of very well.
Thank you so much. The second service that you mentioned the CILC is doing is the help with the deportation proceedings. In Madison, there was a huge ICE raid in September 2018. Would you be able to talk about what happened?
Sure. So, yeah, it seems like forever ago, but it also seems like yesterday that, we suddenly had ICE, in our backyard. And I do want to put the caveat that ICE is, in Madison often. They are not doing community pickups right now the way we saw in September. And September 2018 was very different. And it was different because we saw ICE come into our community and make arrests and collateral arrests, without really using much discretion. So they came in, they were looking for specific people, but they arrested the other people around them or in the vicinity, or other people who had nothing to do with the arrest regardless, and just did not use discretion at all in deciding how to make these arrests. And that's not something that we had seen in the past. It's not something that we even see now. And we did find out later that this was an operation that was possibly organized, outside of the Wisconsin jurisdiction, outside of the ICE Milwaukee office, and was actually organized by officers coming from other areas that didn't know our community and, felt that they could operate this way without discretion. And so we organized quickly. The Immigrant Affairs Office of Dane County started receiving calls. They knew to reach out to us, and we were able to reach out to ICE immediately about what to do, what was happening, getting more information, and trying to get people released early in their stay in detention so that they didn't have to suffer through the trauma and violence of detention for too long. Some people stayed longer than others. Some people were deported. And so I think that was definitely a time where we saw how important universal representation is, how important it is to have the Immigrant Affairs Office and a group of people to respond to this emergent need.
And I just remember all the fear that it also put into the whole community, multiple communities, not just one community. It was various communities that were impacted by it. And also thinking about it, you mentioned the deportation aspect of it, so the legal part of it. And for me, it's always thinking about the educational part of it too, and how students were so afraid to go to class for 4 days in a row. Parents were afraid to come out of their houses for 4 days in a row. And just like all of that fear that was also present in addition to the legal proceedings as well, and thinking about like how do we support the community and how do we respond. And I think that was one of the things that was important to kind of think about. Then how do we respond? So you mentioned that ICE is still currently in Madison. What is the current situation with immigration or ICE here in Madison?
Honestly, we haven't seen any local arrests happen for quite some time. We do have local residents who are being taken into ICE custody and taken to the Dodge County facility, but they're being arrested outside of our county. So they might have had law enforcement contact with, I'm not going to name the county, XYZ County, and that county might have a better relationship with ICE, and ICE is contacted. And so then even though they're a Dane County resident, because they were passing through there, they come to the attention of ICE. So that's how we've been seeing local residents right now be arrested. We haven't seen anybody arrested locally out of our Dane County jail or, at their home. I would say easily within the last 5 or 6 months. That could change, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But right now, we're not seeing a lot of activity locally, and a lot of that has to do with the enforcement priorities that the Biden administration announced in January of 2021.
Was that what you just mentioned about certain counties or certain departments or certain areas cooperating more with ICE? Was that part of the 287G legislation or law?
There was something in the legislature talking about possibly, penalizing departments that didn't cooperate or deputizing right through 287G. But from what I know, the counties that are currently cooperating with ICE don't have a formal 287G program, at least from the local residents that we've been seeing at the Dodge facility. It's just that it's a policy of theirs to answer questions, cooperate, or even affirmatively reach out to ICE, probably by using racial profiling, right? And so that's what we're seeing currently outside of our county.
So as we think about the situation that happened with ICE and the deportation proceedings, and kind of how do we ensure that more people have access to it, are there resources or action items that people can do to kind of support this kind of work to make sure that we could support as many people as possible?
Yeah, so I think right now, call your senators, right? We need a path to citizenship for all. And when I say all, I mean all, right? Even people who've had contact with law enforcement. So we know that there's something right now in the budget reconciliation bill. We know it doesn't include everybody. We still need to call our senators and people that are representatives and make sure that they get this done. They need to push this through. So that is an action item that people can do right now. I also, as a former educator, always encourage people to educate themselves and humble themselves around these topics. There is a lot of information out there. Take some of it with a grain of salt. Other of it, focus on it. Look at who's doing the work. Look at who's writing these articles and, follow them. Read the information that's there. Reach out to people like me. I am happy to have conversations with people about immigration law and policy, and the history of it in our country, because it's really intriguing, and we could do a whole podcast just on that. Also, there's a new Center for Dreamers at UW. Support them. Congrats to Erin Barbado and Erica Rosales for this work and getting this opened at UW. Call them, support them, and donate. Donate to your local legal service providers in Dane County. CILC, Centro Hispano. Call the Immigrant Affairs Office, see what they need. Jewish Social Services right now, who's going to be going through a lot, resettling the Afghani people who are coming to Fort McCoy. So there's legal service providers in Dane County who could use your dollars. So donate.
Thank you. And I think that those are really great action items that you mentioned in terms of what each of us can do to make sure that we support this work at our local community with our local organizations, and also the financial support that's also important. Are there other things that you think it's important for people to know about immigration, about our current state of immigration, or about this work?
I would say something to know specifically, I talked earlier about our work in removal defense and people who are detained. And I feel like it's so important, this Universal Representation Project, and to keep it going, because there's a big benefit from having legal representation. We talked about the statistic, right? We know that when people are whisked away out of their communities by ICE, they are isolated in detention. They have limited access to phone, right? Which means they can't call their family, they can't call a lawyer, right? They're cut off from work. And so there's a major financial impact usually on the family. And the legal analysis for whether or not you qualify for any kind of relief and protection against deportation is very nuanced. Immigration law, they say, is the most difficult, right behind the tax law. So it's so, so important to have an advocate there who understands the law, who understands the nuances, and can see if you're eligible for some type of relief. Remember, people who are at risk of deportation are in front of an immigration judge, and right next to them, at the table next to them, is the attorney for the Department of Homeland Security, who is a trained lawyer. Between the judge and the lawyer, they're holding proceedings to try and deport you. Being by yourself is probably one of the more terrifying things, knowing that you're trying to defend for your life and your right to stay here. So supporting universal representation here in Dane County and nationally is huge. And so I just wanted to draw some more attention to that and really let everybody know about the reality of what it's like for somebody who represents themselves in immigration proceedings.
Thank you for that. One of the other topics that has been in the news a lot right now has been DACA, and kind of like DACA has been in limbo for a while. One of the new injunctions was to prevent new applicants again for DACA. Can you kind of talk a little bit about currently where are we with DACA, and what does it mean for people who apply for their first-time application?
Yes, Judge Hannon in Texas. Sometimes I have a love-hate with Texas. That was a difficult decision, and it was definitely a blow to so much organizing that's been going around for years, many years, around deferred action. Currently, people who, first-time applications were opened for a little while. And if you were eligible to apply for DACA and you submitted a first-time application and it was not adjudicated, so you did not receive an approval or denial, unfortunately, those applications are, sitting there on someone's desk. They are not going to be processed at this time. That's really, a big blow to the program. It's why we need to call our senators. It's why we need a path to citizenship. But for people who, do currently have DACA, they can renew their DACA, and they should continue to do so. They should also be screened for alternate forms of relief. And so when I say that, I just mean talk to an attorney about whether there's something outside of the DACA program that you might be able to apply for that puts you on a path to citizenship. And if your renewal is pending, that's okay. they will continue to process applications for renewal.
You mentioned the importance of being able to be screened to see if there's other pathways or other options. Is that something that CILC can help with?
Yes, definitely. If you give us a call and say, hey, I have DACA, I want to know if there's anything else that I can apply for at this time, do a full intake. We ask specific questions so that we can be able to give you that advice.
Thank you. And then what is currently happening with advanced parole?
So advanced parole applications are still being accepted and they are still being processed. So if you are eligible for advanced parole, speak to an immigration attorney about what it means to travel abroad with advanced parole and what that looks like. So definitely speak with someone before applying, but they are accepting those applications and they are being processed at this time.
And similar question, does CILC usually help provide some resources for that?
Yes.
If a student is kind of thinking about traveling abroad, or what are the possible pathways?
Definitely. And if we're not able to answer a specific question, we'll send them to the Immigrant Justice Clinic that also helps with DACA, advanced parole, and hopefully the Center for Dreamers is able to have some capacity about that. I don't want to call them out and say they will, but I'm just really excited about that opportunity for our community.
Perfect. If someone needs help financially with the financial fee or the application fee for the immigration process, are there resources that you could help? And I think for this question, I'm thinking more like the DACA renewals or other fees that might come up for immigration.
Definitely. DACA renewals are expensive. And so I know that locally, the Office of Immigrant Affairs and Centro Hispano worked hard together to ensure that people who needed financial assistance for DACA renewal had access to it. And so I would contact the Immigrant Affairs Office to see if that funding is still available. I also know that on a national level, United We Dream had certain grants and they were fundraising also for financial assistance. And so I think they're another really great resource to look at to see if there is grant money available to help with funds for renewal.
Thank you. So as we are getting close to the end of the interview, one of the questions that I have is there anything else that you think is important that we haven't discussed yet? Anything else that's important for people to know about working with undocumented people, with individuals who have DACA?
Sure. So just some final words are, right, someone's immigration status does not make them someone that's less, they're not less of your neighbor. They're not less of an integral piece of your community. It does not make somebody less human. It does not make someone less than you. And so looking at things through that lens and knowing that this piece of paper doesn't change who this human is in our community, stand up for them, advocate for them, listen to them, and they'll tell you how to use your voice, and then use it that way.
Thank you so much, Attorney Aissa Olivarez, for your time. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Educators and Immigration. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your family, your friends, and your colleagues. You could also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you again, and hope you have a great day. This has been the Educators and Immigration Podcast.